I'm Keith Inskeep. I teach at West Virginia University. I grew up over in Grant County in West Virginia and have spent the majority of my life in this general area, except for about 5 years out at Wisconsin. I come over here to Maryland. There's Kelly back there, and you just heard Jeff talk, and you've got Susan, you've got David Green. You've got more expertise here in Maryland in raising sheep than probably I'll ever have. But what I've worked with for the last 50 years is reproduction in sheep and cattle. And the whole concept of synchronization of estrus has several implications and benefits. And yet the perfection of it to something that we can use on a routine basis has taken a lot of years before we had something on the market in the United States that could be readily adopted by a lot of people. So that's the subject I'm going to talk about today. And if I can find where page down is on this machine. How about there? Okay. Can we turn the lights down then, Kelly? I want to start with being sure that we're all on the same page. So I'm going to start with talking about the function that we're interested in, the function of the ovary. This is a sheep ovary. And we see on this ovary a corpus luteum here, another corpus luteum here, and a follicle over here, and then another follicle down here where this is shining back at you. Those two structures, the corpus luteum and the follicle, are integral to everything we want to talk about today. The follicle contains the oocyte and has to ovulate to release that oocyte in order for you to become pregnant. Once that follicle ovulates, it forms in the structure that was there, the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone, the hormone necessary for the maintenance of pregnancy. And it is that hormone that regulates the cycle of the sheep and determines what we can and can't do in terms of managing reproduction. So if we wrong way. If we look at this diagram, we see that I've drawn in it the patterns of concentrations of several hormones that are involved in that cycle. And progesterone is this pattern in blue. And we have a 16 or 17 day cycle typically in the sheep, whereas it would be 21 days in a cow or a goat. And that progesterone production begins about the third day of the cycle after estrus and ovulation. And then increases up until about day 9 or 10, sort of plateaus at that level. And then if the ewe is not bred and pregnant, the corpus luteum regresses, it stops producing progesterone, and that allows that ewe to come back into estrus again. Estradiol, the hormone that stimulates a surge of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone from the pituitary gland, is produced by the follicle, and when progesterone drops, estrogen then can rise. It can rise because there are increased pulsatile secretions of LH that stimulate the final growth of that follicle and cause it to produce so much estrogen that it then triggers that LH surge, and the LH surge causes ovulation. So follicle-stimulating hormone has recruited those follicles, and along with LH has supported their growth, and then the LH supports the final maturation, and the ovulation. The other hormone we have to put into that picture is one called prostaglandin F2 alpha. Prostaglandin F2 alpha is a hormone that was discovered back in the 1930s in semen, and it therefore was called prostaglandin because people thought it came from the prostate gland. It actually comes more from the seminal vesicles in the male, but it comes from the uterus and is later produced by the corpus luteum itself during this process of luteal regression when progesterone goes down. So prostaglandin F2 alpha begins to be produced in increased amounts by the uterus about day 11 or 12 of the cycle, and between 11 and 14 it begins to initiate luteal regression, the drop in progesterone. That drop occurs very rapidly on day 14 or 15, and then the U shows estrus about 2 days later, that ovulatory surge of LH and ovulation. So it's important to know those patterns. Now, having told you those patterns, I want to ask you a couple of questions. If we know what those patterns are and how those hormones work, which of these hormones would we use to replace the corpus luteum and then withdraw it to allow estrus to occur? Anybody? You have to be more responsive than my students in the university.
Progesterone.
Progesterone. Give that man an A. Now, next question. If we wanted to regress that corpus luteum to end the cycle and start a new one, what hormone would we use?
Prostaglandin.
Prostaglandin. Excellent. Okay. So, you now have the answers to those questions, progesterone and prostaglandin. So, the next question is, how long would we treat with these hormones? For progesterone, we know that it's secreted for a period from about day 3 of the cycle to about day 14, or about 10 or 12 days. So, if we want all of a group of animals that are cycling at random to show estrus together, for example, so that we could use artificial insemination, or so that we can use a lot of ram power to breed a lot of ewes at one time and have them all lamb in the same period so that we get the labor over with at lambing time quicker, then we're going to think in terms of treating for a fairly long period. If we want to regress the corpus luteum to end the cycle with prostaglandin, then we need to know it's going to act rather quickly if we give a fairly large dose of it, but we need to know when will it be effective. Is it effective throughout the cycle or only part of the time? And what we find is that given that period that the corpus luteum functions, we need to give progesterone for about 12 days to allow all the corpus to regress in the different ewes. Or if we treat with prostaglandin, it's effective from day 5 through 14. Before day 5, the corpus luteum is just forming and growing. It doesn't have its full blood supply. And prostaglandin has to be given multiple times to cause regression. But a single injection will cause regression from day 5 through 14. And after 14, those ewes are going to come to eat anyway. They're already on the way. So that gives us the basis for studying whether these hormones can be used effectively and for ultimately using them. So here we have a demonstration of the effects. We give a progestogen for 12 days. In this case, this was progestin called fluorogestone acetate given in intravaginal sponges to deliver it. 223 used, we had 92% of them in estrus. 63.5% of those were pregnant, and they dropped 1.65 lambs. So that's a pretty successful synchronization of estrus. Those all came in heat in about a day and a half to 2 days. With prostaglandin F2 alpha, because it's only effective during days 5 through 14, the first time we use it, we won't affect all of the animals. So a scheme that is used is to give 2 injections 12 days apart. The first time we get all the animals that are between 5 and 14 to respond, and those animals then 12 days later will be about 10 days along, so they're in a very responsive stage, and the other animals will either be ready to come into estrus from their previous ovulation or at a stage that they have a responsive corpus luteum. So now we treat 236 ewes in this case with prostaglandin. 95% were in heat, 65% conception rate, and 1.75 lambs born per ewe treated. Any questions about that basic treatment? Yes.
Either or treatment?
Yes, this is either or in this case. This is a treatment complete with the progestin. You don't need any prostaglandin with that one because it's 12 days. This one is complete with the prostaglandin and you don't need the estrogen, or the progesterone. Okay? So those are basic treatments that we've used for in-season breeding of sheep and have worked very well. And now the question becomes, what do we do when we want to breed these animals out of season? And so we have to think about that. The other thing we have to think about is what kind of ram power do we need in synchronized estrus? And from studies that were done at West Virginia, we first looked at 6, 9, or 12 used per ram at synchronized estrus. You'll all recall that the recommendation in the United States has been 40 used per ram when they're not synchronized. The Australians, on the other hand, used 100. But we looked at this in different ways. The first experiment, we did 6, 9, or 12 ewes per ram. And we had, with 12 ewes per ram, 80% of the ewes lambed. With 9, 82%. And with 6, 84%. Well, that's a nice linear response, but it's not different, 80 to 84. So we then said we can go up to a higher level. And these studies were done by Dan Niffen, who's now beef extension specialist up at Penn State when he was a graduate student. And he put either 12 or 18 ewes per ram at synchronized estrus. And he put them either in a single ram lot or in 3 rams in the lot. If you're a purebred breeder, you need to have a single ram lot. If you're a commercial situation, you can put 3 rams in a lot. If 1 ram isn't working as well, the other one might make up for his deficiencies. And then we had yearling rams and ram lambs. So with that combination, we found that when the 3 ram lots, the yearling rams and the ram lambs performed equally well. They could handle 18 ewes per ram. In the single ram lots, the ram lambs did not settle as many of those ewes as the yearlings when there were 18. And even the yearling rams had a little less success with 18 than they did with 12. So from that, we recommend never more than 18 and never more than about 15 with a ram lamb. So those are the recommendations for ewe-ram ratios in that case.
That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
The research that's been done here, which breeds were used?
These were typical West Virginia crossbred ewes, Suffolk Dorset breeding mainly in that case. We haven't found much difference in that with the different ones that we've used, except differences in breed of ram. Dorset rams, Finn rams, Katahdin rams are more active, more aggressive than some of the Hampshire and Suffolk rams, so that sometimes you can use a few extra with those more aggressive ones.
Sir?
Yes?
You're talking about yearling rams and ram lambs. Why not mature rams?
We didn't have any mature rams in the study. The mature ram is going to be the same as the yearling. Okay? I know of no reason for the older rams to be different than the yearlings until they get too old like me. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. They're going to go down with age at some point. Okay, now, turning to what's the method for delivery. We've had over the years things like starting back in the 1940s with injections of progesterone to do this, and some people injected it every day and some every 3 days with a larger dose and so forth. We had the prostaglandin come along in the 70s, which becomes a single injection type of approach. We had in the 50s the orally active progestins that were developed for the birth control pills. And they were more potent than progesterone, so we could feed MGA, for example. And we had the various sponges that were developed. And then in the late 1980s, Bob Welch over in New Zealand developed this little device for cattle and sheep. It's called a controlled internal drug releasing device, or a CIDR, C-I-D-R. Not C-E-D-A-R, the tree. But this is made of a plastic spline with silicone rubber containing the progesterone melded onto it. So that substance is heated and it's put onto that spline at about 1 millimeter thick in the covering of it and allowed to harden. And the progesterone then is delivered from that. It has this little tail on it. So we squeeze these wings together, slide it into this applicator, put that applicator into the vagina of the ewe, and release it into the vagina, and then the wings spread, and it holds behind the vulvovaginal sphincter so that it doesn't fall out until we pull it out by this little tail that's sticking out from the vulva. So the loss rate on these is very low. We've never seen more than a 2% loss rate in any of the studies that we've done with it. In 1998, we were asked to do work to try to get this approved by the Food and Drug Administration for out-of-season breeding in sheep specifically. And we did experiments in 98, 99, and 2000, submitted those data to FDA, and lo and behold, in October of 2009, it was finally approved. So that's a slow process, and that explains why many products that are on the market for other species are not available for sheep and goats, because they're considered minor species and the market's not big enough for companies to pay for the development. A federal program specifically for minor species supported this work, and the West Virginia legislature gave us a grant to work on it as well. So we did that work, and I'm going to show you some of the data from it to find out whether the cedars could be used for out-of-season breeding. Now I want to digress for a moment and talk about why do we want to do out-of-season breeding. What are the goals for changing the lambing season? And some of you are very familiar with reasons for that. Improve prices by having lambs on the market to meet specific holidays and niche markets. Also at times when there are fewer lambs available in general. Another thing that you may not think about is that there are fewer losses to predators. In those early studies, we also had Dee Singh doing studies on farms, about 50 farms in West Virginia, where she was looking at losses and feed costs and profits and so forth. Some of them were on programs of fall lambing, others were on spring. And what she found in that was that we had about 6% loss to predators of spring-born lambs, and only about 3% loss to predators in the fall-born lambs. The difference being largely coyotes who are feeding their young in the spring. And that meant that then the fall lambs, we had more of them saved. Lower feed costs in some cases, other cases the feed costs were higher. And so the goal overall was improved profits. And I can tell you that the farmers who are using it will agree that the profits are better. They're very happy with what happens with this in terms of the out-of-season lambs. So how do the seeders work? The seeders then deliver that progesterone from the silicone rubber to the Estrus ewer doe, and that prepares her then to show estrus and ovulate in response to the introduction of the ram. You notice I have that bold, and that's because the most powerful tool we're working with here is the introduction to the ram. Ewes that have been isolated from rams for a month are very responsive to ram introduction. But what normally happens when we introduce a ram is that in about 10 to 20 minutes, those ewes start releasing more LH more frequently. The frequency of LH release from the pituitary gland in an anestrus ewe is about once every 4 hours. But we put a new ram in there that she hasn't seen before, and that changes to once every hour. That then stimulates estrogen production by those follicles and leads in most ewes that are of responsive breeds, and we'll talk about breed differences a little bit, in about 39 hours on the average from Oldham's work, we see an LH surge, and then about 24 to 27 hours later we'll see ovulation. But that first ovulation leads to a corpus luteum that only lasts a few days, about 1 to 4 days, and regresses. And that ewe does not show estrus with that first ovulation. She often doesn't show estrus with the second ovulation, then has a normal luteal phase, and finally shows heat about 18 to 23 days after we introduce that ram. So the ram is a very powerful stimulus to ovulate, but it takes a while to get estrus with ovulation. When we pre-treat with progesterone, we now get estrus and ovulation together about 45 to 60 hours after that ram is introduced. So it's effective in mature females that are in good body condition, that are not lactating, and we'll talk more about that, and that have been isolated from rams. And with that, additional treatments are not necessary, and we have no other approved treatments to go with it at this point in time in this country. So what about the differences in breeds? We know that breeding seasons differ in length in different breeds. We have short breeding seasons in South Downs and Cheviots and North Country Cheviots and Border Leicesters. Long breeding seasons in Dorsets and Rambouillets and Merinos and Fin Sheep and Katahdins and St. Croix and those hair sheep are year-round pretty much. Hampshires and Suffolks are intermediate. And so we see those breed differences. Does that make a difference in the response? Yes, it does. These long season breeds will respond better, and they'll respond at more times of the year. When we get into April and May, we're in the depth of Van Estrus for some of these short breeding season ewes, and they're not going to respond very well. We move over into May and June, and these Hampshires and Suffolks begin to respond even better than they did before. They'll respond some back in April and early May. As we move into June and July, they respond even better. So, some differences in time of year and differences in those breeds will affect these responses, and we'll see some variation. I'll show you some examples from some different flocks directly. So, the other thing that we know from this early work is that the length of the breeding season is a heritable trait. It's probably the most heritable of any of the reproductive traits. Twinning rate's only 10 to 15% heritable. But length of the breeding season, the estimates are around 25 to 26%. Dave Notter used that over at Virginia Tech and increased the success of breeding out of season in a group of three-way cross ewes from about 33% when he started to over 80% in a 9-year period of selection. So we can select for the ability to breed out of season. That means if you keep fall-born replacements, then you'll select for responsiveness to the cedar and the ram introduction. But if you let that dollar that's available for those lambs convince you to sell those ewe lambs instead and to save your ewe lambs from spring breeding, then you're not going to make any progress in increasing responsiveness in your flock. So now I'll show you these experiments that we did. And this is the basic experimental design that we used. We put those cedars in for 12 days, fitting with what we knew about from the breeding season. Or we said, maybe there's going to be a problem because those cedars were developed for the smaller Romney sheep in New Zealand with these big Suffolks that we have in this country. So maybe we should see what happens if we gave the treatment for a shorter period of time. So we set up a group with only 5 days of the season. 12 days versus 5 days. That's the first part of the design. The second part was to see whether we could increase ovulation rate in these out-of-season ewes, because we know that ovulation rate peaks in October and November in the northern hemisphere. And we wanted to see if we could increase ovulation rate in these ewes and thereby increase litter size and make it more profitable. So those are our two treatment interests. So we had 4 groups then. Cedar for 12 days. Cedar for 12 days with FSH added just the day before removal of the cedar. The cedar for 5 days with the FSH. And then just the ram introduction with no cedar, no FSH. That's the basic design that we used. And then we observed these ewes for estrus every 12 hours for the first 5 days. Whoops. And we kept the rams with them to give them an opportunity to cycle twice. And then when we removed the rams, after 26 days, we did pregnancy diagnosis by ultrasound to see which ewes were pregnant from that first opportunity to breed. And then we did pregnancy diagnosis again between 45 and 50 days to pick up ones that had shown a second estrus and ovulated from that and conceived at that surface. So what were the results? Well, here are our conception rates as measured by the pregnancy diagnosis. Over here in the controls, we had just one ewe that was pregnant. But in the treated ewes, with the cedars, we've got about 65 to 70% of them pregnant from first service. How many of them lambed to 2 services? Now those controls, which remember are going to show their first estrus cycle about the time that the treated ewes are showing their second one, now 45% of them lambed as well. So the presence of that ram was a powerful tool. It just took longer to act. Adding the treatment with progesterone, we get a combination from 2 services of about 70% of these ewes are pregnant. Any questions on that? Yes?
I have I'm a little confused because I'm coming to this with experience with using cedar and prostaglandin injections on beef cattle. And when you say estrus and ovulation, are you talking about heat?
Yes, estrus equals heat.
Okay.
Okay? That's an important question. I refer to it as heat too. When I write it down to go on the slide, I end up putting estrus. Okay. That means the same thing. Okay, now what kind of lamb crop did we get out of those ewes that were pregnant from this? 1.6 lambs. And did the FSH do any good? Not really. We still got 1.6 to 1.7 lambs. Not enough more to amount to anything. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
The age of the ewes for these weren't first pregnancy.
These are mature ewes. No, they're not first pregnancies. There's a few yearlings in there, but we didn't have any ewe lambs in this study. And I'll talk about ewe lambs a little bit later as well. Okay, what happens then at lambing time? Here's the lambing pattern. These controls don't start lambing until 15 days into the lambing season. The treated ewes start back here. That first group of lambs that we're going to get has come there, and then we get more at the second service. Here the controls are all coming at the second service, and 100% of the ones that came from the controls are then from second service. That one pregnant ewe at the first service lost her pregnancy. We'll also talk about pregnancy losses, because there are some, regardless of whether you're in season or out of season, regardless of whether you synchronize estrus or not, there are some losses during pregnancy. Here's the percentage of ewes lambing to both service periods from a second experiment that we did. Remember that we had only with FSH in the day 5 group in that first experiment. So we did a second experiment with and without FSH in the day 5 group. Controls after 2 services were near 50%. Progestin for 5 days, 70%. Progestin and FSH, about 70%. So the FSH is not really doing us any good. And I'll show you one more study with FSH a little later. Overall prolificacy here, 1.6. Same way. FSH isn't doing any good for that either. Okay, so what kind of results do we get if we take this out to the field and use it in your flock? This is a flock of purebred Dorsets up in Preston County, West Virginia. 98 ewes that were synchronized in May and June of 2010 with 5-day cedar and ram introduction. First service, we got 54% of the ewes lambing, 1.73 lambs per ewe. Second service, 19% more, 1.82. A few stragglers of the third service period. The rams weren't pulled out as quick in that, although we recommend just using the 2 so you don't mess with those stragglers. Just save them, put them in the breeding in the fall. And we have 1.3 there, an overall average of 1.67. So that's about how West Virginia ewes perform. Some of you may have hair sheep. How many of you have hair sheep? 1. Okay. Here's the experience with a group of Katahdins. These are over at our Wardensville experiment station. 77 ewes in this group, and this is actually Again, 2010, this is one of the poorer responses with those ewes. They usually do a little better than this, particularly in terms of the percent lambing at first service. They have been over 80% at first service a couple times. Here they were 47, 31 at second service, 13 at third service. Overall average of 1.47 lambs. And the survival is very good in those. They're vigorous little buggers.
Are these service periods out of season? That's your success rate out of season?
That's correct. Those are all out of season. May, June, out of season for typical ewes. It's not as far out for those catons. Okay? So, when I say service period, I'm talking about that first 2 or 3 days after the cedars are removed is the first service period. The second one is going to be 1 cycle later. The third one cycle later. And they spread out a little more in those subsequent cycles. All the ones that are bred in 1 day within a breed will normally lamb in about 7 days. If they're bred over about 3 days, they'll lamb over about 10 days. Sometimes we get a really lucky thing in terms of getting them all together and they lamb in 4 days, but if you do like the fellow that we're working with here, George Worry, and breed 150 ewes at a time, it can get pretty hectic in a couple of those days. These are up at George Worry's at Senior Hill, Pennsylvania. George is a long-time sheep producer. His father had the old traditional blue-tip merinos. Then they added Dorset into that at some point. And George has gone into trying to get more meat in his sheep and market lambs at an earlier age. And so he is using Texels. So these gals here with their ears up are Texels. And this one had more Dorset than her. And that's the kind of combination that he has is pretty much Texel and Dorset cross. The more Texel ewes are bred back to Dorset, and the more Dorset types are bred back to Texel, pretty much. So here's July 2011 in George's flock. We did a big demonstration up there for a group of farmers. We had 101 ewes treated with cedars and 22 controls. 2 of those 101 lost the cedar in that case. So we had 1 ewe in each group that we lost identity on, so we didn't know where she came from, or which ewe she was, so we couldn't get a data point on her. So we scanned 98 and 21. At scanning first service period, we got 57 pregnant here, or 58.2%. 55 of those 57 ultimately lambed. And we had just 1 here that apparently cycled on her own, probably due to her Dorset breeding. And she went through and lambed. At second service period, 18 more, 44% of the remainder, and only 11 of those lambed. And I'll show you data that we have seen that throughout the studies we've done, we often have more losses at the second service period than we do at the first service period. We think that's probably related to the hot weather at that particular time. Over here in the controls, we only lost 1. And here we have overall 66 of the 75 that were diagnosed pregnant lamb and 15 of the 16. So overall, we've got a lamb's crop of 1.43 here, 1.6 over here. And that relates to some of the ones that were pregnant with twins were ones that lost a few more in that particular case. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute in terms of where losses occur. So the take-home messages from these studies with the synchronization out of season are that first, ram introduction is our most valuable tool. Progesterone treatment, particularly with the cedar in this case that we've used, is the second tool. Body condition before breeding is important. Early rebreeding means early weaning. The lactating ewes don't respond well. We like to have them weaned at least 10 days, and preferably 14, before we put them into one of these programs. And The black-faced ewe lambs that we have in a lot of our flocks, we've had some problems in trying to breed them out of season the next spring. Fall-born black-faced ewe lambs simply have not performed well the next spring. So we have a student currently working on that problem, but the first flock he recruited to work on it is the Dorset flock. And so these Dorset ewe lambs that were treated with cedars for 5 days and exposed to rams in early May were fall-born ewe lambs born in October and November. And during the winter, from December the 16th to March the 23rd, he kept half of that group on 16 hours of light. Now the concept for that came from studies at the University of Michigan, where with Suffolks they found that in order for ewe lambs to reach puberty, they need to see long days before they see short days. So we're giving them long days by light in the barn for 16 hours for that 14-week period. Lowell Slider had tried that with some white-faced ewe lambs up in South Dakota, and these were April-born lambs that didn't reach puberty in the fall, and then he treated them with long light during the winter and increased the number that reached puberty in April and next spring. So the Michigan work and the South Dakota work indicated that light might help. Well, what happened in this case? What we found was that we actually got better success in the controls than we did in the treated. These were Dorset ewe lambs, so what we're seeing is that the light was not particularly helpful in those. So this year, the student is repeating this study. This time he has a group of Dorsets, a group of Suffolk crosses, and a group of Texel crosses. So now we'll see whether those other breeds are benefiting from light. But breeding ewe lambs out of season continues to be a challenge. Yes, sir?
You say the most important thing is the introduction of the ram.
That's correct.
If we do rotational grazing, how far does the ewe need to be away from the ram prior to it? Is it sight and sound, or?
Sight and sound can have some effect. The main effect seems to be a pheromone that's carried in the wool. So the ram definitely needs to be away from contact. So if that ram is 2 lots away, you're okay. If it's in the next lot, then you've probably got problems. Because those ewes and rams are going to see each other and rub against the fence, and we're going to have to move. And they're going to smell each other and talk to each other and so forth. Other question? Yes?
I have a question about the length of days. My understanding, I'm right, that they begin cycle as the days get shorter.
That's correct.
So if you keep them on excess light, do you then have to take them off of it?
Yes, that's what we did. And I didn't say that well enough. Good point. Because we took them off of that long light in March. Then we attempted to breed them in late May, 2 months later.
Oh.
So they came off of that light in March and went to the shorter day. Okay? Now, it's not completely short. So the other thing we did in these animals is we put melatonin implants in their ears to make their day shorter. So they're seeing more melatonin. So that seems more like a short day. So we use a combination of added light and then taking it away and giving melatonin. Yes?
I have a small flock. I usually run around with the ewes, and typically they breed all year long, but I just introduced a new ram, and he is not interested at all. If I pull him out, how long do I have to keep him separated from my girls before I can put him in and get that punch from that ram?
A month is the standard recommendation on that. Work that Kushwa, a student at Davison, California, did several years ago, if you changed rams and put in a different ram, it might not have to be that long.
He was young when I put him in.
Yeah. So, a month is the standard for that. Yes?
help me remember, horned Dorsets used to breed out of season.
They still do. But
Do the
where do you find one?
And when they put the Columbia in them to get the Pole Dorset, they lost that?
Well, I don't want to endorse that statement exactly. I might get shocked here. But yes, the Columbia is a shorter season. Even though it has Rambouillet in its background, it also has Lincoln in its background. Lincoln long-wool sheep, the long-wool sheep were shorter season breeders. Other questions? Those are good ones. Yes?
What does out-of-season breeding do to your regular season? Is there a success ratio for your...
Okay, again, that depends on the breed. For the ones that lamb in the fall, they're lambing in the breeding season. Most of these ewes of most breeds will cycle back by 35 to 40 days. So we are breeding some of these back and getting 2 successive crops, then giving them a break until the next time. Okay? So, and the ones that don't breed out of season are going to do just fine in the fall like they normally would.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Okay?
The ewe delivers, and you're breeding them back in 35 days?
35 to 40 days, they'll begin to cycle back. We have done some this last year. Dr. Marlo Knights has, with his students, a group that lambed in October. They put cedars in them and put rams back with them in December. And when they pregnancy checked in February, they had 80% pregnant.
Had they taken the lambs from them, or were they lactating?
Those were lactating when they treated them. The lambs were taken shortly after that and went on one of the early markets. But they were lactating when they were bred in that case. So that's an important point to understand about how sheep function. Lactation is very suppressive to the response to the ram or the response to the progesterone when you're out of season. In season, lactation does not suppress cycles after about 35 days. That was first shown in work in France with the Ile-de-France sheep, which are one of the shorter season sheep. You had a question.
Let's talk about cost and profit.
Okay?
When you look at the cost for all these additional nutritional feed and elements that you need to do, is there enough profit there to justify all this work?
It varies with how you feed and when you sell and what the prices are then and what your feed costs are. Okay? There's a lot of variability there. When Deasing studied that in the period 1999 to 2001 with about 50 flocks, that some were fall, some were spring, some were both, okay? Put those data together. The fall-born lambs, or the ewes having fall lambing, I should put it, were making $4 more per ewe on the average.
And do you know what the price point was for lamb at that time?
About half what it is now. Okay? So in general, it's more profitable now than it was then.
Okay.
But if you're paying too much for your feed, it's not going to be as profitable. If you take a person who has largely a pasture system with only feed for the lambs being bought and not feed for the ewes, the guy's buying no grain for ewes. He's got pasture, haylage, silage, hay, so forth for the ewes. He's making very good money with this kind of system today.
What's the life expectancy of that ewe without that grain?
Depends again on the nutrition she's getting from the grass.
Okay.
It's going to vary. And each person has to evaluate these things in their own situation. Those cedars now on the market are about $5. If you sell lambs, as one of our groups of farmers did that were born in October, the week before Christmas, for $2.38 a pound, at an average of 55 pounds. They made a lot of money because they didn't have to put much feed in those lambs. Okay, so the Northeast niche markets are an advantage for that. If you're putting a lot more feed in them to meet a 135-pound high restaurant trade lamb, then it may not be as much profit. Depends on what the price is you're able to get for them. I can't give you an exact answer. You know, it's going to vary with those situations. Other questions on those same things? Okay, my time is up. So we can stop there. Kelly, I don't want to run overtime and take somebody else's time. I guess I've got a couple minutes. Let me show you. I was looking at 1 o'clock. I guess I've got a couple minutes. Let me show you a couple other things right quick. Unless there are other questions on what we've covered so far. Okay. What I wanted to give you a heads up about, so that you're aware of it, is that there are these late embryonic and fetal losses that occur. And we can go in and pregnancy check ewes at 25 days, and this one is a day 25 pregnancy, and here we see twin embryos and their membranes. Here's one that's day 30, another set of twins. And find these pregnant, and at day 25 to 30 we can get a pretty accurate count of them with the rectal probe with the transducer. But what we see is that some of these ewes lose pregnancies. If we go back to our synchronization studies with the Cedars in 1998 and 1999, we saw some losses in the first service and more losses in that second service. We have then gone through and looked at, in 2 different studies, with one of them with 1,400 some ewes and another one with over 1,000, when those losses occur and how they occur. And we can summarize it that there are 3 types of losses. Ones that are carrying single lambs and lose them. Ones that are carrying multiple lambs and lose them. And what happens more often is ones that are carrying multiple lambs but lose one of them. So there's those 3 types of loss. The other thing you see in this graph is that they can occur between day 25 and 45, 45 and 65, 65 and 85, or 85 and term. About 2 or 3% of the embryos that are present at day 25 are lost by term. So why do those losses occur? This shows the numbers of losses, and here you see it, 2 to 3% each period. We did this early study, and black-faced ewes were losing more of these embryos than white-faced ewes or the mottle-faced ewes, crossbreds. So I showed these data to a group like yourselves over at Monterey, Virginia, and one of the farmers said, is it because the black-faced ewes had a higher ovulation rate? Logical question. Submitted the paper about this work to the Journal of Animal Science, and one of the reviewers said the same thing. So we went back and went through the data and sorted that out, and no, that's not the case. The ovulation rates were actually higher in the white-faced and the mottle-faced ewes. So that was not the explanation for that. A subsequent study that we did, we had more losses in white-faced ewes. In that particular study, those happened to be dairy-type ewes. They were ones that we collected data from up at Wisconsin at the dairy sheep studies. So we know that there are differences, and to follow that up, we look at that whole thing of ovulation rate in more detail, and we look at what are the other factors that occur. So let me show you some other data that illustrate this. We know that litter size in sheep increases with age. Here are ewes lambing at 1 in this second study, actually. And they dropped just over 1.45 lambs. At 2, 1.65, 3, 1.77, and so on. Up to age 6, they're still increasing in the litter size that they're actually dropping. But if we look at the data for the counts of embryos on those ewes, and look then at the losses, we see that as they get older, they also lose more. So the embryonic and fetal losses are also greater in the older ewes. That kind of surprised us. We thought maybe they would do a better job than the young ones. We look at ovulation rate. Here's a study that Dr. Knights did giving FSH to try to increase ovulation rate. And he increased the ovulation rate, but if we look at the number of the corporugia, which are a measure of how many follicles ovulated, how many of them are not represented by a lamb born, that goes up too. So an increased ovulation rate increases losses. So there are those losses. Another study we did, this one with hair sheep with Barbados blackbelly ewes. This time, one of the things we found in these studies is that progesterone for the out-of-season breeding does not have to be high in order to get a good response. That 5-day treatment was no better than the 12, but easier to do. Here, we assigned ewes to different levels of progesterone, high, medium, and low. So the ovulation rate goes up with lower progesterone. That's the reason that some of those out-of-season ewes did as well as a lot of in-season results that we would see. But then when we look at the births per corpus luteum, here's the data from that previous slide. The ovulation rate is going up, but the births per corpus luteum is going down. Because as ovulation rate increased, we have more losses. Now, put in how many of those lambs are born. Total number of lambs born, and it's absolutely flat. So the variation in progesterone or the treatments with FSH have not really increased the number of lambs born, even though they did change the ovulation rate. We have some recent data with treatment with a hormone called PG600 that's a mixture of LH and FSH that, in its action, that does appear to give us a little boost in number of lambs born. But basically, we're going to get what we get without any extra hormones over and above what we can deliver from the cedar and the introduction of RAM. So what we learned from that, the embryonic and fetal losses occur throughout gestation. About 3 to 4% of embryos lost every 20 days. Breed of ram, breed of ewe, and individual rams differed in the losses. These rams differ in losses of the ewes bred to them. You got 60-some rams in that study. Partial losses are greater than complete losses, and the losses do increase with ovulation rate. And that's it. And I did finish on time.